James Madison was a very influential founding father and had an immense impact on the politics and history of the United States. Although a small man in stature, he was about 5 feet 4 inches in height, he was a giant in terms of his influence he had on American history. Today we take a look at the unique contribution he made to the American Constitution. Also, as co-writer of the Federalist Papers, he played a major role in having the Constitution ratified by the individual states. As a young man, he was elected to the Continental Congress in 1779 at the age of 28. He quickly came to realize that the original Constitution, known as the Articles of Confederation, were too weak to give real authority to the central or federal government. The Articles were designed to coordinate the Revolutionary War effort against Britain, but were inadequate to create a strong union in peacetime. Both Washington and Alexander Hamilton broadly supported Madison's concept of revising the original Constitution. However, the support of all 13 states was required, and such agreement proved quite difficult to achieve. Madison was born into the elite Virginia planter class. He was born in 1751, but by 1779 he had served in the Revolutionary War, been elected to the Continental Congress, and was well acquainted with fellow Virginians George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. As a member of the Continental Congress in the 1780s, he kept Jefferson informed of developments in the United States, as Jefferson was by then living in Paris as United States Minister to France. Their correspondence by letter helped both of them to think through the need for constitutional change. By the mid to late 1780s, Madison, Jefferson and many others had come to realize that actually the original Constitution, known as the Articles of Confederation, needed to be amended and revised. Born on the 16th of March 1751, James Madison was the first of 12 children, 6 of whom never reached adulthood. His father, James Sr., owned the Belle Grove plantation in Virginia with about 5,000 acres and over 100 enslaved people. At 18, young James went to Princeton College and crammed a 3-year course into 2 years. He then went back home to educate his younger siblings. In September 1794, James Madison married Dolly Todd. They had no family, but Dolly was a crucial support to his political career. She held many social and political functions in Washington and helped to define the role of First Lady. As a young man, Madison had joined the local militia in Virginia. He was a small man physically, but became a colonel in the militia and was a brilliant organizer of men and supplies during the Revolutionary War. By 1779, he had become a member of Jefferson's Council of State in Virginia and was elected to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia at the age of 28. He became increasingly aware of the weakness of the original Constitution and argued strongly in favor of its revision and amendment. Madison never qualified as a lawyer, but made a detailed study of ancient European constitutions, which Jefferson sent him from France. He aimed to develop a stronger US Constitution that could facilitate such a diverse and powerful expanding nation. By the mid-1780s, Madison and other congressmen were conscious of the urgent need for a stronger and more centrally organized structure of government. Many congressmen were aware that the colonies were vulnerable to attack from a powerful European nation. They also saw the need for a more independent financial structure of support for the federal government. However, large states like New York and Virginia were so powerful and wealthy that they saw no need for greater defense. Smaller states, on the other hand, valued their independent sovereignty and did not want it undermined by a federal authority. James Madison was involved in the early stages to organize a constitutional convention. Eventually, delegates from 12 of the 13 states agreed to meet in Philadelphia in May 1787. Rhode Island, as a small state, refused to send delegates to the convention. The stated purpose of the convention was to revise the Articles of Confederation. However, at a very early stage, the Virginia Plan, which was created by Madison, was presented to the convention by Edmund Randolph. It represented a very significant departure from the Articles of Confederation. The Virginia Plan represented a strong national government with three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative branch would be represented by two houses of Congress, both based on population size of the individual states, but with different functions. The executive branch would be represented by the President, to be elected by an electoral college based on the number of members of Congress from each individual state. The judiciary, on the other hand, would be independent of the other two branches of government. Clearly, the Virginia Plan was strongly resisted by the smaller states, as it would have removed the basic principle of equality between the states regardless of size. It was now proposed to break that principle. The convention became deadlocked around these issues between smaller and larger states. An alternative plan, known as the New Jersey Plan, was presented to the convention. It proposed that all states retain equal voting power, but that the federal government be given stronger powers in relation to revenue raising and foreign and interstate matters. This plan was presented to the convention by New Jersey delegate William Patterson. It was quite similar to the Articles of Confederation, but was resisted by the larger states on the basis that their larger populations would pay far more tax and therefore should have a greater influence on the overall structure of government. Eventually, a new plan emerged, which was presented by Connecticut delegate Roger Sherman. It contained elements of both previous plans and became known afterwards as the Great Compromise. This plan proposed a two-house Congress, with the upper house, the Senate, upholding the principle of equality between the states, with two senators to represent each state regardless of size. The Electoral College also would grant the smaller states a greater relative say in the election of a president. On the other hand, the House of Representatives would grant greater levels of representation to the larger states based on their higher population levels. The delegates who attended the convention knew it would be quite difficult to persuade the individual states, especially the smaller ones, to ratify the Constitution. Madison, along with John Jay and Alexander Hamilton, organized a campaign of writing to various newspapers throughout the states. These articles became subsequently known as the Federalist Papers, and were very influential at the time in persuading individual states and people to ratify the Constitution. New Hampshire was the 9th state to ratify on the 21st of June 1788. This is a very important date in US history. Henceforward, the Constitution became the official framework document of the government of the United States. Throughout the ratification process in 1788, Madison reluctantly agreed to a Bill of Rights in regard to individual liberties such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and that type of thing. However, he recognized that smaller states would not ratify the Constitution unless rights such as these were granted. He also realized the danger of the anti-federalist argument in calling for a second convention, which had the potential to unravel the entire process. By the early 1790s, Madison was a leading member of the House of Representatives and a close advisor to President George Washington. He had also by then become a strong advocate of the Bill of Rights and recognized such rights as essential. When Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State at the end of 1793, Madison became a close political ally, and by the mid-1790s, both men had effectively become co-founders of the newly emerging Democratic Republican Party. Jefferson was narrowly beaten for the presidency in November 96, but as vice president continued to develop an alternative view of government. Along with Jefferson, Madison co-wrote the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. These resolutions were a response to the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. The resolutions were possibly the biggest mistake of his career, as they were subsequently interpreted by people like Henry Clay and John Calhoun as justification for a state's rejection of federal law in the nullification crisis of the 1830s. Madison was appointed Secretary of State when Jefferson won the presidency in 1800. As Secretary of State, he played an important role in persuading Jefferson to accept the Louisiana Purchase without the need of a constitutional amendment. He also negotiated the 1805 Treaty of Tripoli between the United States and the Barbary States, thereby ending the First Barbary War. Despite repeated efforts, he failed to achieve peace with Britain, which resulted in the Embargo Act of 1807. By 1808, Madison, as Secretary of State, was the most senior Democratic Republican politician and thereby won the nomination for president in June 1808. He went on to win the election in November 1800, defeating Charles Pinckney decisively by 122 to 48 electoral college votes. Madison also won a second term in November 1812. This time he defeated Dwight Clinton 128 votes to 89. Both France and Britain continued to attack US shipping. Madison attempted to play one European power against the other by offering to cease trading with the other if either one would agree to peace terms with the United States. However, by June 1812, both Congress and the President had exhausted all diplomatic efforts and declared war on Britain on the 1st of June 1812. At an early stage, Madison had hoped to take over Canada, which was controlled by Britain at the time. But the Northwest governors were reluctant to supply either men or equipment, and the US suffered a number of military setbacks in the early stages of the war. However, General William Harrison won significant victories at the Battle of Tippecanoe in November 1811, and 10 months later he won another significant victory at the Battle of Fort Wayne in September 1812. Andrew Jackson in the South won the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in March 1814 and the Battle of New Orleans in January 15. The Treaty of Ghent had recently been signed, but the New Orleans victory created the impression in the US of the US having won the war, making Jackson a national hero all over the country. In August 1814, the British attacked Washington and burned the White House along with other prominent public buildings. Madison was forced to flee the White House to his home state of Virginia on horseback. The following month, the British Royal Navy bombarded Baltimore in Maryland, but failed to break the US resistance. This event inspired poet Francis Scott Key to write the words of the national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. Two states joined the Union during Madison's presidency. Louisiana joined in April 1811, and 5 years later, in 1816, Indiana joined. In 1817, the US population was about 8.9, almost 9 million people. Madison retired in 1817 and died in 1836 at his home in Montpelier, Virginia.